King Tuff, Smalltown Stardust, album review, let's chat about it. Hey friends, what's going on? John here from What's Spinning here tonight to chat about this latest album from King Tuff, Vermont-based psych rock and garage rock band headed by Mr. Kyle Thomas, who in his early days with the project began turning a lot of heads with the Was Dead project, and I also was not immune to it. I loved the hell out of this thing. I ate this album up. This was a great blend of just weirdo power pop, sweaty garage rock, throwbacks to classic psych that I was all in on the time. There were catchy hooks, there were fantastic tracks like Kinda Guy, and this overall sense of playfulness and innocence that I felt the genre was missing at the time. I loved this thing. As a matter of fact, Tuff for a while was a guy that I just was a real cult favorite of mine. His self-titled album that followed it up, it's been a cult favorite of mine for years. I still love this thing. It's got the perfect balance of just sweaty guitar anthems like Anthem and Bad Thing. But it also had just as many sort of rainy day slacker jams like Stupid Superstar and Loser's Wall. Not only that, the album overall is just a lot of fun. It was around 2014's Black Moon spell, though, that I kind of fell off a little bit with Tuff's music. The energy was down, the aesthetic was wearing off for me. I thought King Tuff's songwriting this time around just wasn't up to par. It was a big kind of shrug album for me. Now, the last time we heard from him in 2018, he put out The Other, which is an album that I have very mixed feelings on. This was his most on-the-rails and straightforward classic psychedelic rock sounding album to date, for better and for worse, because there were tracks on there like Raindrop Blue and Psychostar, which I thought were some of Tuff's best tracks in years, but so much of this album was long and drawn out and the energy was down. I missed the sort of merry prankster ways of his earlier music at the end of the day. Now, it's been a while since we've heard from King Tuff, and leading up to this album, the singles, they were okay. And not so surprisingly, that's kind of my thoughts on the whole album. It's okay. Early on in the album, we get How I Love, and for me, this sounds like where Tuff should be right now. It's a somber, bluesy, stripped-down ballad with a lot going for it. King Tuff's performance is really heartfelt. I love how just hazy and bluesy this track gets at times, and the aesthetic is great too, and it's got just a nice crunchy riff that just kind of breaks through the smoke and the haze of this track. I mean, as far as a personal ballad goes, I haven't really heard anything like this from King Tuff, at least not in some time, and I'm glad that it's here. Portrait of God, I think it's the best track here. I thought this was just a really great single in general. It's just so upbeat and jolly and carefree. This brings me back, man. This just puts me in such a great mood. It paints such a great portrait of King Tuff as well. No pun intended. It actually has like a free spirit to it, which is more than I could say about some of the deeper cuts on here. This right here, it works for me. Pebbles in the Stream is really nice too. This is a much more stripped down and folky sounding track, spoiler alert, as far as like a singer-songwriter album goes. This is the closest thing you're going to get to it from King Tuff, and I'm not opposed to it. Like this moment here, this track is absolutely gorgeous. It's also one of the most visual tracks here, and it really leads to some incredibly beautiful lyrics from King Tuff. It's a lovely ballad, and when I heard this track start up and saw its over 4-minute run length, I was a little worried by that, but I think it's justified. Even the instrumental here, between the really lush pianos that come in and some of the ambient sounds that King Tuff uses here, is really beautiful. And Tell Me is really nice too. This is an old school singer-songwriter jam with some folky nods, very out of the book of like a Harry Nilsson. Honestly, it's a really charming, sweet ballad with not a lot of fluff. I mean, sure, it's a little cheesy, but if that's the biggest issue I'm dealing with here, I'm fine with it. And yes, I do really still miss the energy and just the fun of his early work. I really do, but this certainly isn't terrible. He's certainly onto something. I just wish this album was more consistent, because the idea of stripping down his sound to a sort of old school psychedelic folk sound on paper sounds about right, but when this album gets ugly, man, we are living in a really tough time for King Tuff. Like Love Letters to Plants that starts this album off, this just put me in a bad mood. This is just way, way, way too fluffy, which on paper, I don't have an issue with. But this is too much for me. This is what makes modern psychedelic rock just so hard to swallow at times. It's got the hazy aesthetic, but this just sounds like way too stoned for my liking. And there is no substance at all. And I actually burst out laughing on a meditation. This has no place here, and it's the furthest thing from spiritual. And when we get to Rock River later on in the album, I thought at this point I could have used some energy. I could have used a little bit of a jam. But then I hear this, and that's clearly not the answer. This is one of the most lightheaded, cheesiest, and poorly written tracks on the album. It is just really tough to sit through. It's a big oof. And the rest of the album that we get, it's just very middle of the road. King Tuff actually, has his head on straight as far as the sound goes. He's onto something. He just needs to sharpen it up a little bit. Smalltown Stardust, this album's title track, this is where we're at right now. I'm going to be honest with you. When this dropped as a single, I hated the damn thing. I was not into it at all. I will say this, though. Hearing this compared to some of the worst moments on this album, it's grown on me slightly. Very slightly, though. This track, it's fine while it's on, but it doesn't really move me. It's just very middle of the road. I do kind of like the rough around the edges sound to the track, but there's just no substance. It's a little bit too hazy. But then I hear the Bandits of Blue Sky, and I'm almost, upset and hurt because this track is incredible, and this, to me, is what this album could have been. This track has such a cool aesthetic to it that is unlike anything else here. It's a little grittier, even dark in parts. It's bluesy, too, and King Tuff's performance may be his most electric one here. He sounds like a damn presence here. If you wanted to keep going down this sort of singer-songwriter, psychedelic folk path, this is the way to do it. This is the sound that I want to hear a little bit more of. This sounds like a complete thought, but on top of that, this feels like a journey. But then he matches that up with Always Find Me, which is easily one of the most boring tracks here. This track is a mishmash of thrown together vocals, oh god, just overly hippie vibes that are just nauseating at times, and just one of the most mishmash instrumentals I've heard in some time. And you can forget all about substance at this point. The ship has sailed. This is the longest 3 minutes and 59 seconds I could have imagined. But the wheel, just to infuriate me even more, is absolutely gorgeous and a fantastic finale. It's easily the most meditative track here. I listen to this and I go back and listen to some of the overly hippie crap that Tuff was putting out early on in this album, and it makes me think that this album really could have been something, because this track is amazing. It's gorgeous, it's spiritual, it's honestly probably the deepest thing that we get on this album. It's a real feeling. It's just a fantastic, bold, well-wrote finale that just makes me honestly hungry for more. His head was on straight. I just wish that, he could have gotten a little bit more consistent. So this album overall, it's middle of the road for me. It's certainly not his worst album. It's far from his best album. And, for trying out almost a completely new sound, a sort of psychedelic folk and singer-songwriter sound, there's actually a lot of great material on here. His songwriting seems to be in a good spot. The production, the aesthetic, it's all here. There's some really great ideas on this album. I just wish he just shined them up a little bit and made something a little bit more consistent. He's going in the right direction, but I personally need to hear more of it, and I need to hear something much more consistent. That's just me, though. I'm feeling a strong 6 on this album, but let me know what you all think down below. If you liked the video, be sure to give us a like, give us a subscribe, and let me know down below what you would like for me to chat about in the future. And until next time, have a great day, friends.